Good evening and welcome to a session. Welcome to the fourth day of the Jaipur Dialogues. Today we're in discussion with three esteemed panelists. Two have already joined. We're waiting on the third. Uh, R. Jagannathan, who you all know already. Karan Bhasin, a very uh, emerging scholar, and as far as I'm concerned, he's already emerged. And Gourav Vallabh will be joining us later on, hopefully, if the internet issues get sorted out. We're discussing agricultural and labor reforms today. And I just wanted to maybe get opening remarks of, say, about 10 minutes. 10 minutes outer limit, 7 to 10 minutes each from Jagannathan sir and Karan. Jaggi sir, you go first.
Yeah. First thing, I think these reforms were long overdue, probably for the last 30 years. In 1991, we liberalized the industrial sector, we liberalized the capital sector, but the so-called second generation reforms in factor markets, labor, land, and all were kept pending. In fact, when the UPA went to amend the Land Act, it regressed and made land reforms, reversed the land reform process by destroying the land market and saying, okay, if you buy land, you have to pay 2 times the market price and 4 times the market price, effectively transferring power from the farmer or the owner of the land to the middleman, which of course has been a UPA theme song. They love middlemen like anybody else. I mean, this is not the case with the BJP, which I think definitely, despite the fact it is known as a Brahmin Baniya party, it has actually gone against the interests of the Baniya in some way and done the brave and bold thing, both through first with demonetization, which I think was a mistake, then with GST, which I think is a work in progress, but if you look at a 2 or 3 year time span, it should be fine. Now they have moved boldly into 2 other areas, which is agriculture, in which India was badly in need of reforms for 70 years, and we didn't get it. And then labor, which we did get finally a reasonable amount of this. The problem with agriculture is we have destroyed India's original entrepreneur, who is the farmer. Okay, the guy who faces the vicissitudes of nature, of wayward crop growth, of locusts, of finance, everything he has faced. But we have made a brilliant entrepreneur into somebody who can only live off the udders of the welfare state. This is what happened. So one of the things you're seeing now, so the 2 or 3 key things that they've done in the farm labor bills, one to sort of expand the market outside APMCs, and the second thing to allow them to enter into contract pricing so that they can actually know in advance how much they will get before the thing. So those are 2 important things. The opposition, of course, is coming from vested interests because a lot of mandis will lose some revenues, some middlemen will lose revenues, and various things will happen. This opposition is essentially limited to the high procurement belt of Punjab, parts of Haryana and Western UP, but most other places have no such problem because they have never faced this. As far as labor is concerned, I would say the government has done the right things by raising the limits for which you need to take government permission before you rationalize labor and other things. It has left the door open for states to actually go even further. Unfortunately, the real roadblock to reforms today is not the government in Delhi, but the governments in the states, which for political or other reasons are not moving as fast. I think the state where I am currently in, Karnataka, has managed to move a little forward. UP hopefully will move aggressively forward on labor reforms. This was a reform that ought to have been done 30 years ago. We wasted 30 years with terrible labor laws and lost out our entire manufacturing industry to China, which made hay while we dithered over labor reforms and land reforms. And hopefully this is the thing. The gains that we will get from these reforms will actually be lower because if you had done it in 1991, they would have been far higher. But now we have done late. It's better late than never. That's the only thing we can say about most things we do in India. So I think it's a way forward, and I hope that this continues. And that the real challenge is to get states to act on them and make sure, because labor is something states can legislate in, and the government has said, look, I have created the enabling rules. In fact, the enabling thing happened even in 2017 and 18. Well, Jaitley's budget said you can offer fixed term labor contracts, but no state notified it. So, two labor reforms that enable states to move ahead were not taken up. So, this is the problem with this. The states are dragging their feet, and it's time to give the states a kick in the butt and say, bloody well, do something. And I hope they get the message. Uh, Muted, you muted yourself.
Thank you, Jaggi sir. Gaurav Vallabhji, do you want to make your initial 10-minute intervention?
Thank you very much, Abhijit ji. I'm sorry that I joined a little bit late because of some technical issues at my end. Uh, as the topic suggests is on the agriculture reforms and labor reforms, I will be speaking more from the perspective of economy as well as the agricultural economy and the labor economy. If I ask anyone that what do you mean by reform, they will say that reform means that we are going to change the way we are doing the things right now, and that change is going to benefit. That is the meaning of reform in a very general or layman's understanding. My question is that by these three agriculture acts or the bills which are there, what to whom we are targeting? What is the benefit we are going to achieve? Is it to the farmer, or is it to the state government, or is it to the central government, or is it to the consumer, final consumer, like people like you and me, or is it for none of the above, or is it for someone else? And I will give you one by one. When farmers, there are three bills. One is regarding the sidelining or bypassing of the APMC Act. So by bypassing the APMC Act, what we want to achieve? We had done this in 2006 in the state of Bihar, and for last 14 years we had empirical evidence for the state of Bihar. What is the current condition of the farmers of the state of Bihar? I don't want to quote. Let's have the discussion on the basis of the data. Is the Bihar state farmers are getting MSP or the right price for their output? Because they had bypassed in the 2006, the APMC Act was abolished, the Anaj mandis were abolished. What we had achieved in that? You will be surprised that in a bigger states category, Bihar state farmers are getting minimum price for their output. Minimum price. And this is not my data or your data. This is the agriculture ministry data. The second, the bill on the agriculture, which talks about the contract farming. What we want to achieve is contract farming is beneficial to farmers. If yes, how? Prove it. Because more than 90% of farmers in our country are having the land holding less than the 2 hectares. So how you are going to help them by putting their land to the suit-boot people? What is the ultimate objective which we want to achieve in that? Is the consumers are going to get the benefit? How? Prove it. And the third is about that holding of the removing the stock limits from the particular products. We had seen the onion prices and potato prices. I don't want to repeat it here. Everyone, all your viewers are aware that what is the current today's onion price in Delhi or Bombay, or for that matter to any other part of the country. So you are removing the stock limits. To whom you are addressing what? So I will say that reform means doing the things better for the benefit of the majority of stakeholders. Here, reform means doing something for the benefit of only one stakeholder, that is the suit boot friends. No one else. Neither farmer is getting benefit, nor consumer is getting benefit, nor state governments are getting benefit, nor government of India is getting benefit. And only few of the people who can stock the agriculture products, buying it at a very low price, extremely low price, and selling it at extremely high prices. And coming to the labor side, which is very close to my research agenda in the current scenario. what we want to achieve? We are saying right now, it is CMIE data, Center for Monitoring of Indian Economies data, that from the April to August, 2 crore 10 lakh salaried class, permanent salaried class people had lost their job. This is not my data or your data. But when I am saying what we want to achieve in labor reforms, by saying that up to 300 people, the employer can remove the employee without serving a notice also. What we want to achieve by that? Right now itself, right, we had a labor, the job scarcity, the employment is a big issue in our economy. What we want to achieve by doing these things? I'm not against reforms. I welcome reforms. If labor reforms, yes, I just heard my earlier speaker, he said that labor reforms was long pending. Yes, you are correct, sir. But this was not long pending, that you are taking the rights of a labor, that he can't argue with you when you are removing for an organization or the establishment which employs less than 300 of employees. And the last point, when you want to do this, you can say, sir, in that developed countries it is happening like that, in US it is there, Sweden it is there, in Germany it is there. I agree, but they had a very severe and strong social security network, which is not in our country, sir. So without that very strong social security network, you are allowing organizations that if you are employing less than 300 employees, without any notice, you can remove the employee. What is this, a reform? Are we calling this as a reform? I'm sorry, this is not a labor reform. This is not at all the labor reform. You are saying that even in certain scenarios, the labor can't do a strike if he has a genuine demands. If taking away the right of strike from a labor, is it a reform? Then I don't think this is the reform from the Indian perspective, from the Gandhian perspective, from the perspective of a democratic setup for a country like India. So I had raised 4 questions, and if there are many experts in this panel, I want their answer to this, that by APMC bypassing, how farmers are going to benefit. If farmers are going to get benefit, the APMC Act got abolished in 2006 in Bihar. Why Bihar state farmers are getting the lowest price for their products? My first question. My second question, that by having a contract farming law, how a farmer is going to get a benefit of a contract farming law when majority of farmers are having the land holding less than 2 hectares? How you are going to give the benefit to them? Is it just giving the entire agriculture to the suit boot friends? My third question, by removing the stock limits, how consumers or farmers are going to get the best price, or from the consumer's perspective, the right price for the output? The people can stock the things, buy it at a low price, sell it at a higher price. And my last question on the labor reforms, that by taking away the right of strike, by taking away in the industrial relations code, that the employees organizations which are having 300 or less than 300 employees, the retrenchment can be done without any prior approval of the government. How this can be a reform for a labor? I just want the answer to these 4 questions, because in my understanding, these are not reforms. This is just exploiting majority of stakeholders and giving the rights of majority of stakeholder to one or two other stakeholders. I'm through, Abhijit. Abhijit, can you hear me? I think Abhijit is not able. Mr. Bhasin, Mr. Jagannathan, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
I think Abhijit, we lost the connection. So, Mr. Bhasin, you may like to take. I don't know. So we should continue.
Karan, why don't you
Yeah,
speak? You can start.
I'll start by making my opening remarks, and then we can have an econ 101 session for Professor
Yeah.
Gaurav. And I think Monte Kaluwalia sir would definitely disagree with a lot what he's saying. In fact, even Dr. Manmohan Singh would probably disagree with what Professor Gourav Vallabh is saying. But we'll come to that later. But first, I want to begin by outlining what really means as a reform. since we started on that note. And typically, when we talk about a reform, what we really mean is any sort of change that enhances productivity, which leads to a higher growth. That constitutes as a reform. Now, when we look at this in the perspective of the agricultural reforms or the labor reforms, what are they doing fundamentally? Fundamentally, they are unshackling the productivity potential of our agricultural sector, of our labor markets, of our small firms, MSME sector, etc. And when we unshackle that productivity potential, that is how we achieve a higher growth rate. Professor, R. Jaggi sir rightly mentioned that these reforms should have happened way before. In fact, indeed, these reforms should have happened before the 91 reforms, because we opened up our economy even as our productivity levels were lower. As a consequence, what happened, whatever limited industry we had in India, we lost out to the East Asian tigers, to China, and so on and so forth. It's a known fact that companies in India do not go beyond 100 employees, and they do not scale because of the fear of regulatory, complexity that comes the moment they move beyond 100. This is not me saying, this is what has been said, has been established empirically over decades, since the Industrial Disputes Act was amended and the number was reduced from 300 to 100. There are volumes of papers that have specified and explicitly shown why this is a consequence of a more capital induced production that India embarked on, and why we didn't create as many non-farm jobs in the economy that we should have. Fundamentally, when you look at the Indian economy, the paradox is that we have a major part of our workforce in agriculture, but the share of agriculture in GDP is very small. And the only way to correct for it is to have more formal sector, low-scale manufacturing jobs, so that we can take surplus labor away from agriculture, low productivity agriculture, to high productive manufacturing. These reforms are a step in that direction. This would have happened a lot earlier had we done these reforms before, but these reforms are fundamentally in that direction, where they will ensure that factor markets shift factors of production from agriculture to manufacturing, and those will result in creation of jobs, higher income growth, higher wage growth, and overall general sort of well-being. And that's the sort of macro econ of reforms, as it so concerns. Now, Professor Vallabh raised 4 very specific points that I'll come to one by one. His first point was on APMCs and why will it benefit. Well, the first thing that we study in econ is basically incentives. Everyone has their own self-interest and they follow their incentives. So the larger question is that how will bypassing APMC benefit the farmers? Well, we are not bypassing APMCs. Public procurement and MSPs, much to my displeasure, will continue. In fact, it will continue as a parallel with regards to private mandis being setting up. So how will these two operate? Farmer will have a choice whether they can sell in a private mandi or in an APMC. Now, any rational farmer will sell in a private mandi only if he's getting a better price than the MSP or than what is being offered at the APMC. Fact is, despite having MSP realization in India has been a problem across decades, whether it's the Congress government, BJP government, some other coalition, it does not matter. Farmers do not get MSPs. That's a reality, and that's something that has been the problem across the sort of history, because government cannot procure what is being produced. We are a food surplus country. Now, when we had policies like APMCs, we were starving. We were a country that was trying to strike sort of food security. We achieved that long ago. Now, the purpose of farming is not achieving food security, but is to create adequate marketable surplus that can go into industry and create value addition. That is precisely why the policy of wheat, rice, paddy, etc., all of that is something that we need to get away with, and that is what this sort of bill aims to achieve. The question on Bihar, and this is something which is very important because a lot of people keep talking about this empirical evidence. Well, you cannot do a reform in one state, that too with such minuscule scale, and expect results. Economies of scale, it's a very fundamental question. Private markets will come up and give an efficient outcome when there is scale available for the private sector to put in investment, develop cold chains, develop procurement centers, and so on and so forth. There are a lot of commodities, which are not sold in APMCs, which are sold in private mandis, and there's better price realization there across the country. That evidence is available to us. So that's something that we really need to, understand, that citing Bihar as an example is not, you're not comparing apples to apples. It's not a fair comparison, and it disregards the basic economic principle. What the APMC also does is that by having two markets, it promotes competition, and that competition reduces transaction costs. So he asked why and how will this benefit the consumers. when transaction costs, which are costs associated with any transactions, they go down, there's greater consumer surplus and producer surplus, which basically means that I, as a consumer, will get the commodity at a lower rate and the producer will get a better rate. And both of this is simultaneously achievable because the deadweight loss or the transaction costs have been reduced. And that's how I will also benefit as a consumer and farmer will also benefit. Of course, it will take 6 to 8 months, for this entire transition to happen. But once it happens, we will have stability as far as food prices are concerned. And this will also restrict the ability of the government to affect food price inflation in the economy, which is very much needed. We do need to go back to revisiting some of our principles, fundamental principles, and embrace market economy for agriculture. The entire thing about farmers will be sort of at a disadvantage, etc. We heard all of that for decades for Indian industry. But what happened when we opened the Indian industry? Small manufacturers were at the forefront of IT revolution and at the same time manufacturing revolution in whichever sectors where we were successful. So this entire thing that corporates will make farmers slave, etc. Well, we heard this for even our industry, but that didn't happen. And I think we need to let go of this fear. The second question that he asked is with regards to corporate, contract farming and how will it benefit farmers? Well, Amul is the best example, and there are other sort of um, uh, experiences of cooperatives and so and so forth that we have seen in India itself, where farmers with small land holdings have organized themselves, try to strike for a better bargain with a corporate entity, and they have been able to achieve a better price realization. Jaggi sir rightly said that what contract farming does is it reduces uncertainty of price, which helps the farmer have a sense of security, and that is fundamentally critical for any viable businesses which is subject to so much uncertainty because of nature, and input prices, etc. So contract farming as a whole, as an exercise, will actually benefit small farmers a lot more than the large farmers, because large farmers as it is can avail of these contracts through the standard sort of contract mechanisms that are available within the country. The third point that it talks about is stock limit removals. Well, you want the private sector to come in and set up cold storages and make a efficient distribution system. But I, as a private investor, am reluctant to invest unless I know that government is not going to intervene in my supply management. So removal of stock limits is important to ensure that there's greater investments in distribution, logistics, and warehousing of agricultural produce. If the government is going to, if I'm going to put in the money and government is going to come and tell me that, no, you cannot store onions or tomatoes, why will I put in the investment in the first place? And if I don't put in the investment, we're going to continue to have an inefficient system of food distribution in this country, which is a travesty, because at the end of the day, that inefficient system comes at the cost of the taxpayer, the producer, and the consumer. And that's something that needs to be understood and accepted by all. And the fourth point is with regard to labor, since he mentioned that we are taking away the rights of the labor. Well, that's precisely what's not happening, because actually we are giving a lot of rights to gig economy laborers, to a lot of sort of fixed term employment, and so on and so forth. So the labor code is actually very progressive. If you look at it, it's in fact more progressive than what some of the advanced developed economies have. And the 300 thing that I mentioned, as I rightly said, that you cannot have economies of scale if you're going to tell the government, if you're going to tell the companies that if you have more than 300 employees, if you have more than 100 employees, you cannot fire anyone without taking prior approvals, or people can strike whenever they want. That's not how modern economies are built. That's not how any economy is built. And we paid a heavy price for reducing the employment threshold from 300 to 100. So we have just reversed that. Ideally, I would have appreciated if government does away with the 300 figure as well, because at the end of the day, it's not government's business to tell me when can someone retrench workers and when it cannot, because at the end of the day, a business is a viable private enterprise, and it has the freedom, and it should have the ability to take these decisions. One very important point that Professor Vallabh mentioned was about India not having social security. Well, sir, I humbly disagree, and I strongly disagree as a matter of fact. Maybe India did not have a very comprehensive social security net in 2014, and the reason why it did not have is because we could not afford one, and the reason why we could not afford was because we didn't have the kind of tax revenues. Our growth rate was faltering, and we were very busy in sort of ensuring that we have very leaky programs where public money used to go to waste. Now, a lot of that has changed, and because of efficient redirection of public money, we have PM Kisan, which in a way provides income security to farmers directly. There are insurance coverage that has been extended. EPFO, so government is trying to push aggressively for a lot of the informal workforce to be formalized under the EPFO, and they are giving incentives like the recent incentive for fresh hiring, where the government will pay a contribution of both the employee and employer of the EPFO. So I think it's unfair to say that we don't have social security net. We are trying to build one. In fact, India has one of the world's largest health insurance program as a public health program. So, and all of this, by the way, has happened after 2014. So let's not try to conflate the issues over here. Let's appreciate what the government has done right on the economic front and on the redistribution front, because all of it is in front of us to see. There's adequate data that we have to support each of the claims that we are making.
Thank you, Karan. So, what we're going to do is we're going to have a discussion for the next half hour or so, and then half hour, 45 minutes, and then we'll open it up for the audience questions. Right now, I'm getting a lot of comments from the audience. I'm not getting any questions, which is why I'm going to prolong the discussion till we actually start getting any questions proper. So first, sir, in order that you started, Jaggi, sir.
Yeah.
Like you pointed out that because these reforms have come quite late, they should have happened much earlier. The expected returns, you said, are going to be quite low. Now, one of the things has been that we were never told how to benchmark demonetization. The government itself didn't have a standard for benchmarking the returns on demonetization. We're not very clear about the benchmarks for GST as well. Like you said, a work in progress. What, according to you, would be measurable benchmarks? And I think that will go to Gourav Vallabh's question that he asked. What, according to you, are the measurable benchmarks that we should set for these agricultural and labor reforms?
Yeah, I mean, I think let's not get into demonetization and GST. On demonetization, I would now believe that it was not necessary. Though today in COVID times, I'm saying it's actually coming very useful, because just imagine if 1.4 billion people had to exchange cash for their essentials. Now you can comfortably do it with UPI and ATM and whatever it is. So you can have contactless payments for your essentials. You can pay 50 rupees without having to exchange a 50 rupee note and getting COVID in return. Okay. So my point is, this is actually serving us. We could not have put this as a benchmark when demonetization happened, which created an immediate impact on the informal sector and for the cash-based sector, which was damaging. So let us accept that reality. But an unexpected benefit has been now when we are deep in the dumps and you want to have contactless payments, this is actually helping. Okay, so but it was not anticipated at that time, so you can't say now we are a success, therefore that was right. So that we need to give that up. As far as GST is concerned, I would say no country has got it right in the first attempt. Everybody and his aunt was saying, oh, GDP will go up by 2% immediately you do GST, and never told us that, okay, there will be so many problems. So the government did what the economists and business and others said, and they've done it. And in fact, in the year after GST, there was a spike in GDP, if you note. It was only after that we saw some structural issues coming and reducing growth. So that is one point. Now, coming to the farm and labor reforms, I think labor reforms, the benchmark is very simple. Let us start with your COVID numbers of about 400 million employment figures, right? If over the last 3-4 years, the CMI labor employment report clearly shows you that you've been oscillating in the range of 396 to 406 million in terms of employment. It is not showing any growth there. So if you're able to show growth, and if, for example, in the leave aside the first year of implementation, from say 22-23 onwards, if you're able to show a growth rate that is higher, right now our employment elasticity of labor, that is for every percentage growth in GDP, we get a 0.1% rise in employment. If that 0.1 becomes 0.2 because of flexible labor laws, it will actually be good for us. Okay, so that's a good benchmark to use. As far as agricultural thing, the benchmarks have to be quite simple. One, we must see a steady decline in the number of unviable farms and farmers who then pool their resources to do that. and grow. And we must see a steady increase in the number of farmers, producers, cooperatives, which then actually forward integrate into the markets. I'm already seeing that. We talked about Bihar. The problem is Bihar, apart from being some lone ranger at the wrong time, you need state governments and cooperatives need to be very proactive in this. You need to aggregate farmers together so that they can create producers organizations which can actually create the brands, the marketing and retail arms and do that. I'm seeing this happening in some of the more progressive states like say Maharashtra. So where I live in Thane for half the year, there is a small outfit called JD Farm Fresh, who actually brings produce directly from the farms into Thane, Navi Mumbai, and others. Okay, this fellow has got 20 outlets. Huh? I think it's called JD Fresh or some such thing. Right now, the point is the minute farmers band together into producers cooperatives, automatically their realizations will start improving. They know all the vegetables they are getting city prices. Mind you for farm costs, which means their margins would have shot up by a minimum of 100 to 200 points, 200%. That is, if a kilo of tomato costs you the 3 rupees to produce, you are getting 25, 30, whatever it is. So this is happening at the margin. So the poor farmers have to be bundled together into cooperatives. The point I would like to make is these are the benchmarks. You must see, can you see hyper growth in producers cooperatives or producers organizations? That is one thing states must help facilitate and also do that. Other thing is you need to measure what is the amount of farm income that's actually rising in the people who have adopted this change. Don't go for the guy who has got half an acre and he doesn't make much money out of it because he has to sell his land and become labor. Then we have to see employment growth in agro industry, tertiary services, in non-farm services. Those are the things to measure. So the benchmarks are pretty clear in terms of knowing how we do that. But I must say two basic things. No reform, I repeat, no reform is without its short-term risks. A guy who is using crutches, if tomorrow you say start walking, he'll probably stumble once or twice, right? Before he starts saying, okay, let me try. Huh? Okay, that's where you have put a farmer, an entire farming community in crutches. Huh? And now you say, okay, next day you have to start running the marathon. It doesn't work like that. It is a process. At the margin, people who are living near cities, they're already beginning to reap the benefits of being able to sell in urban areas, despite having only rural costs, which are very low. So, as this scheme expands, as producers come, you're going to see the benefits. As far as labor is concerned, I think I'm a little less optimistic because what has happened is in today's age, uh, technology is doing a lot of the middle skill work. And so you are going to see a contraction in that, but there is going to be a huge explosion in low skill jobs, which are of a contractual nature, which you're seeing in the Swiggies and the Olas and Ubers and all. Those are going to explode. So what we are seeing is you're going to see an expanded form of employment, but not in the traditional kind of employment, sort of birth to death kind of employment thing. You're going to see contractual and labor, and you need to formalize them, give them social security nets. That's the way to go. The gig employment is going to boom, and that is what we need to these labor reforms for. We need to make sure that the app-based labor services actually boom, so that all the surpluses coming from farmers can easily be absorbed because these skills are easily learned. You don't have to go through an ITI or something like that to be a obtain jobs at Swiggy or the sea. You just need to learn to drive a scooter and watch a Google map, and you're done. That's a 1 week's job. So I think you're going to see a boom in what I would call the lower middle class, blue collar services. We had blue collar employers in factories. Those will go very slowly, but in blue collar services, you're going to see a boom in employment. That is exactly what you're seeing right now.
So both optimism there, but I found it quite worrying that you're talking about growth in the lower income bracket and there's no value addition, or we're not jumping into a middle income economy despite the $5 trillion economy promise and things like that. Gaurav Vallabh ji, The question for you is pretty much the same. One, you agree with Jaggi sir's benchmarks, A. B, if not, can you give us some kind of benchmarks where you would use to measure this? And part C of that is, and I don't think there's any ideological difference on this to agree that the market was and remains heavily distorted. What were the alternate reforms? Because you don't agree with this reform. What were the other reforms that you would have, say, implemented because you consider these reforms so bad?
Abhijit, thank you. I will start where Mr. Jagannathan had concluded, and will take one argument from Mr. Bhasin. I agree with Mr. Bhasin when he said that MSP realization is a big issue. I agree, Bhasin, on this. My question to you, although I should not ask many questions, but in these three farm or agriculture reforms, where this issue is addressed, that is the primary question with which I started. And because of that only, I gave the Bihar example. You while talking, you mentioned that MSP realization is an issue. I had written that. So where this issue is addressed in this reform, when you yourself consider that that is a very big issue, in these three farm bill reform, where that got addressed. Then Mr. Bhasin had mentioned that about reform means high growth. Okay, I will take your definition only. No argument in your definition. That reforms means changing the way you are doing the things for high growth. By this, which sector or which labor or which agricultural means a high agriculture field farmers or the small agriculture field farmer, who is going to get the benefit? The question again comes to that labor. And I will give you one more example, and that with a certain data, Bhasin sir, that when I said Essential Commodity Act, you said, oh, no, that was required. I just read from that act or the bill, the amendment in the Essential Commodity Act, which was made in the form of these three reforms in agricultural sector, that till the time there is 100% appreciation in the commodity, government is not going to intervene. Government can intervene only if there is a more than 100% appreciation. In other words, if I buy a potato at 10 rupee a kg, till the time 20 rupee a kg I'm selling, you are not there to intervene in between at all. If the price rises to 20.1 rupee, you are having a right to intervene. Is it beneficial for consumers? Do you think that 100% appreciation right is there for these people? Then coming to Jagannathan Saab, he gave about the demonetization one benefit. First of all, sir, I am very happy that a learned economist and a learned person like you is still think, or not many people in government feel, but you feel that demonetization is beneficial. I'm thankful I met somebody who is a learned person who is telling that yes, still demonetization is beneficial. And you asked
didn't
me.
say that.
He didn't say that. He didn't say that.
Okay. I'm sorry. Then
He actually said it was.
I misunderstood. I'm sorry.
I said the opposite.
Okay. Then coming to your question, Abhijit, that what should be the right way? The right way, as I told you, when you reform a particular sector, there are many stakeholders in every sector. Like, start with the agriculture. There is a farmer, there is a aditiyas, there is a mandi, there is a buyer, there is a corporate, there is a state government, there is a central government. And then finally, the people like you and me, there is a consumer. My question to you, when Bhasin Saab is also saying high growth, अरे किसको high growth मिल रही है इन stakeholders में से? Who is getting high growth after these reforms? Is farmers, you were saying MSP realization, is he getting MSP realization? When you are saying labor reforms, that okay, we want to free up the economy. Mr. Jagannathan gave many examples of gig economy. My question is very fundamental, sir. Nobody is against gig economy. I know there is a boom in that sector, but sir, do you feel that 55 crore, 60 crore of labor force you can employ in Olas and Ubers of the India? You require a hardcore manufacturing. And I don't want to divert into that particular topic because that itself will take a lot of time. But coming back, do you feel that giving a right to an employer that, okay, until 300 employees, without government's approval, you can retrench the people? How 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 a labor is going to get the benefit of that? Because you are calling that as a labor reform. How labor is going to get the benefit? Mr. Bhasin gave, okay, Montek Singh Ahluwalia ji is not, will not be happy with your definition. Sir, I don't know who will be happy or who will not be happy, but I can tell you, Mr. Bhasin, that labor is not happy. The farmer is not happy, sir. I don't know who big people are will be happy with my definition or not. Now, answering precisely, Abhijit, your question, and then I would again like to hear from both the experts. You asked what should be the way forward whenever you want to make any reform. And believe me, I am also a person who had a very strong liking for the liberalization, opening up, reforms. But whenever you have a reform, at least majority of stakeholders' interest should be on high growth. I am taking high growth term from Mr. Basin's statement. Majority of stakeholders should be on high growth. But unfortunately, that is not happening in these two reforms. I am not against labor reforms. And in fact, most of the people in our country are not against the reform. We reached up to this level because of the reforms of 91. Everybody understands and everybody appreciates that thing. Nobody is against the reform in agriculture sector. Yes, we require reform, but taking away the right, the MSP realization, which was an issue as per Mr. Bhasin, and not addressing is not a reform. I'm just taking his argument. Then you asked me, Abhijit, what should we do? I will say that right now in the current scenario, I will focus on three things. Number one, how to improve the investment in the economy. And when private sector and the credit growth is not taking up, why government is not spending? You will be surprised, Abhijit, that if I compare the past 5 years average spending of government of India, the average capex spending in the first 6 months of this fiscal is 42%. 42%. Whereas on an average in first 6 months, the capex spending was 54% in the preceding 5 years. So first thing, we have to increase spending, investment, both by the government side, state government side. Here, I'm not saying only government of India. I'm including state governments also, and private investment. And private investment is not picking up because data is not showing that. Then second thing, you asked me what issue we should take. The second issue which I think is that you raised this point about the GST. I categorically feel that we require a rate rationalization mechanism in our GST regime. We strongly require. But I am asking all your viewers and both the experts, which I respect both the experts and I respect Abhijit, you also. You also share your views. Is 28% GST on motorbike is a genuine rate? Do you think that motorbike in our country is a luxury good, Abhijit or Karan or Mr. Jagannathan? Then when people are telling for last 2 years, why we are not taking the steps for that? So first investment, second the rate rationalization, and when investments are not picking up, you have to start investing from your side. Unfortunately, government is not spending. And the third issue is the manufacturing. Mr. Bhasin had mentioned that okay, the contribution of agriculture in the GDP. Karan, for last 6 years, all of us wants that agriculture should increase more as a GDP contributory, but it is not increasing. All of us wants that okay, manufacturing sector contribution should grow up, but in fact it is falling year after year. In 2015, that was 15.5%. Today, it is 13.5%, the manufacturing sector. So when you can't have a manufacturing sector whose contribution is increasing, when you can't have a genuine, I'm not against PM Kisan Nidhi. I'm okay with that. But reform is, this PM Kisan is not a reform. That is something, a distribution. And reform should be from a fundamental. When I say this is a reform, it should be fundamental. It should not be superficial. Means changing the jacket button from here to here is not a reform. Changing the jacket is a reform. India needs change of jacket. But currently government is not understanding, nor they had a capacity to understand all these issues. So I mentioned three issues, Abhijit: the spending, the number two, GST rate rationalization, and the number three, which I told you, is about how to improve the incomes in the hands of the people. Again, you may sound, I don't want to enter into a debate of nyaya, non-nyaya scheme, whatever scheme you feel appropriate or government feel appropriate. But ultimately, in these type of tough times, we require money in the hands of the people. I agree, few issues by like 6,000 giving to farmers. Yes, it is a good idea. But I'm saying, why 6,000 when stimulus is there, when you have a margin, when you are not spending, why you are not giving more? And why only to farmers? Why not to the middle income group guys who lost the job? Because every time we compare our growth with the US economy, then when we compare our growth with US economy, then why we can't find out in purchasing power parity terms that how much US gave to their unemployed guys during the pandemic? Can't we give the same amount in the PPP terms? So I would like to hear more from you. I gave my context to all of you.
Thank you, Vallabh. Just one quick point to add to this, because I think both Karan and Jaggi agree with the GST rationalization. I don't think that's under question at the moment. Like Jaggi sir said, it's a work in progress. But since you brought up the Bihar example and Karan countered it with scalability, I think we also need to look at Bangladesh and China, because Bangladesh was behind us in both textiles and ceramics. And the moment they carried out labor reforms very similar to what we're carrying out, they've gone way ahead, way past us. And in China achieved its growth completely crushing labor rights in that sense. Just lip service to labor rights and just crushing those labor rights. And I think the audience also need to remember, in India, depending on the estimate, only 2 to 5% are organized labor. The remaining 95% are unorganized labor who absolutely do not benefit from any of this. And you need to create more organized sector jobs.
Yes.
So, the jobs don't come in the first order of policy. They come in the knockdown effects 2-3 years down the line in the second and third order effects of policy. We have to keep that in mind. But Karan, coming to you, of course, I saw your hand going up, so please feel free to rebut as well. But I also have a very specific question for you. See, policies by themselves don't have the intended effect because they're so intersectional. You have to have a whole set of ancillary and corollary policies. What do you think is lacking, or can you suggest something that will really boost the intent of these policies, as in show deliverable results in a shorter period of time, shorter gestation period? Karan.
So, I broadly agree with what Jaggi sir said towards the start in terms of states delaying a lot of this. To give you a very precise example is that, we've almost there when it comes to agriculture reforms after 3 decades. But now we have certain states, including one state, protesting against them. So much so that there has been a blockade of trains, going in and so forth. So we cannot have states, hold the process of reforms hostage and trying to blackmail the government into giving it what it wants. I think that's a very bad precedent that has been set in by the opposition and their respective states. It started with the GST. Eventually, they had to realize that, they can't get away with it. So they had to swallow the bitter pill and agree with the GST compensation issue with the central government. And I think the fundamental issue with respect to why, some of these reforms don't really take place or have the desired impact is because the state capacity, especially at the lower levels of the government, is so weak that a lot of these issues cannot be resolved adequately. So, for instance, we want to have a single window system for investors coming in, but that single window system means taking certain powers away from different states, and states don't want to let go of those powers. So what happens is that an investor comes in, thinks that it's a single window, that window opens, and once that window opens, he sees that there are multiple doors, and he has to go through multiple doors to get his approvals. And now those are the sort of things that we really need to deal with. And for that, we do need a more responsible opposition. And I don't see that happening. I don't see that happening. And on the specific points that Professor Vallabh raised. I didn't expect to have an Econ 101 class or take an Econ 101 class, but I'm forced to do so. So I hope certain viewers bear with me. But the point that he made about MSP, I'm going to begin one by one. The point he made about MSP was that why isn't MSP realized? Well, you can try doing the same thing over and over again, decade after decade. It will never yield you the results because the policy fundamentally is flawed. And I for one have written about it, and I think Jaggi sir will also agree. MSP as a policy is flawed by its very inherent design. It was a policy for a country which was in a food deficit. We are food secure now. The policy has definitely outlived its role, and that's one of the reasons why I fundamentally am not up for it. But having said that, he's talking about why MSP is not being realized in the country. Can any government procure the kind of quantity that is being produced by the Indian farmer? No government can, no state government can. It's just not feasible, it's just not possible. So why are we trying to do things that does not happen anywhere in the world, thinking that we are different? Well, guess what? We are not different. खून हमारा भी सफेद है जैसे गोरों का है. We are not unique, we are not special, we cannot do things differently. There's no other country which has these APMC kind of mechanics, etc. So it hasn't worked elsewhere in large economies, it will not work in India. So let's get this out of our head that we can have certain rule which says ki MSP mandatory, you cannot purchase below the MSP. Well, markets will find a mechanism to price agricultural products. Markets are far more powerful than what the present opposition gives them credit for, and I think the present opposition disregarded the markets for the first 4 decades, and we paid a heavy price for it. So let us not allow them to do the same. The very fact that we are dismantling Nehruvian socialism is the change of the Nehru jacket, or the jacket that he was so talking about. That was underwear 2014, and that is the big reform that has been happening. So as a question of how will it benefit the farmers? Well, farmers have a choice, right? Whether to go with whatever price is being offered at the APMC or to go into private mandis. They will go wherever they get a better price. So effectively, we will have even the APMC price realization go up over a period of time just to compete with private mandis. Second point that it talks about is about high growth. Well, it might benefit him to know that Indian agriculture in the first quarter, which is the lockdown quarter, where rest of the economy contracted, grew at 3.4%, whereas last year it grew at 3%. That actually shows that there was dynamism there in the rural economy, and that dynamism has been around. So let us not try to conflate two different issues over here. In fact, agricultural situation in India as of today is a lot better than what it was in the preceding years. We had 2 successive droughts which created some problems, but those problems have been largely addressed. But the inherent conflict with what he's saying, he wants to boost hardcore manufacturing jobs, but he does not want labor norms. How can he boost hardcore manufacturing jobs in the absence of labor norms? How can he boost, sort of manufacturing activity in the country where there's no agricultural surplus, which can serve as raw material for the manufacturing sector? How can he have manufacturing in the country when farmers are not willing to part with their land for industry to come up? So there's a conflict there. And I think this is a conflict that Congress inherently faces, that it needs to find an answer for. Unfortunately, they are not willing to listen to the likes of Dr. Manmohan Singh and Dr. Montek Singh Ahluwalia. I really wish they go back to them and to better understand these issues, because it will really help them, and it will really help their former president, who at the moment is, I don't know, vice president or whatever. The other issue is he's asking that he's saying that why should a government approval not be needed to fire people? Sir, why should a private also mean that government has no business to tell a business owner how to run his own business? There have been instances where companies have, accumulated losses, yet they weren't allowed to shut down because of the Industrial Disputes Act. As a consequence, a lot of wealth got destroyed in India. And that is exactly the kind of mindset that we need to get our, policy framework out of. So I think the very conflict with which, he's raising issues are something that really need to be better understood by those that are watching. And it illustrates the inherent conflict that the party and its economic policies in itself face. He mentions that, investment is low and government is not spending. Professor Vallabh, when the economy is shut, 66% of the economy is shut, which includes manufacturing, where will the government invest in the first place? Might I remind you that for a part of, major part of the first quarter itself, we had a lockdown which was the stringent in the world, where 66% of our total economy was shut in terms of its share of GVA. Despite that, if the government has managed to spend 42%, that's actually an impressive stance. If you look at the fiscal projections of the government, it is spending heavily on infrastructure and capex, and those accounts will be there in front of us in the next 2 months. So I think this entire hypothesis that the government is not spending and we need more cash in the hands of people, I think it's based on a premise or a narrative, but it is not based on data. In fact, one of the first things that the government did as a part of the relief package was to give money in the hands of the people under the PM, sort of the Kalyan Yojana, which they announced. The second point that he mentions about rate rationalization. Well, sir, I humbly agree with you on rate rationalization. I have, in fact, put out a paper which completely talks about GST rationalization, and it also highlights why the GST became so conflict. It might benefit you, Professor Vallabh, to know that the GST, when it was introduced, was not so complicated. It had only 4 rates. Today, it has 8 rates. You know why it has 8 rates? Because states, including states opposition ruled, those ruled by the Congress, went ahead and said that no, this is a key industry in our state. We need to give a separate rate to them. Isko 8% pe GST lagayenge. It is, these opposition bargains that created a complicated structure. So when you're talking about GST and its problems, at least have the gumption to own up, because it is being done by the GST Council, where your finance ministers are a part of. So GST is not a problem of the central government or of the BJP. GST is a problem of the GST Council, where Congress finance ministers are also a part of. So you are equally culpable in complicating the system. In fact, I would actually urge the GST Council to take note of it and make public all the minutes of meetings that they have had so far, so that we know which state finance minister or which party added to the overall complexity of the GST. And I can assure you, the moment we do that, I'm pretty sure Congress rule states, combined by the person in West Bengal, Amit, and this guy from Kerala, Thomas Isaac, these three will be the main culprits for complicating the GST structure. Can you believe it? 8 GST rates with 22 different compensation cesses. That's the complexity that the GST Council has inflicted since the introduction of GST. And when we are talking about rationalization, sir, I would humbly appeal to you, please convey this to your own finance ministers who are preventing the rationalization of the GST structure to happen in the first place. They are blocking discussions on rate rationalization because they're so busy talking about compensation cess, which, by the way, is also unfair, that you and your states get 14% guaranteed revenue, while your state finance ministers are caught napping, doing nothing to promote economic activity in their respective states. And the third point, you talked about promoting manufacturing in India. Sir, how will you promote manufacturing in India when you are against private capital, when you are against labor flexibility, when you are against allowing for low interest rates, when you oppose every step and every measure to promote manufacturing in this country, and then you come and say that manufacturing to ho nahi raha, bhiya stagnant hai. Arey bhiya, when you allow and when you take these reforms, tabhi to hoga. Give it some time. You presided over the systematic dismantling of Indian industry for 4 decades. On top of it, when you came in 2004, you allowed for lowering of tariffs without these factor market reforms, which took away whatever industry was left in India. Now, at least give us 2-3 years to see what these reforms will have. And I will assure you, the moment we start feeling the impact of these reforms, which will be from next year or next to next year onwards, Congress will find a mention only in history books and not in the real politics of India. Unless you decide to learn lessons of economics from Dr. Manmohan Singh and Dr. Montek Singh Ahluwalia. So it is my humble request that you guys do institute a program called Econ 101 under their leadership and take classes from them on a weekly basis.
Right. Thank you, Karan. So taking on some of the themes that Gourav Vallabh, I'll be coming back to you, so don't worry. I know I can see you fuming. I will come back to you.
I'm okay. Please carry on.
So just taking on from some of the themes you raised, Karan, I'm going to Jaggi sir again. 3 things that I wanted to bring up with you that you had also raised, but Karan sort of explained in detail. The first is both of you brought up this theme of kicking the states, disciplining the states, incentivizing them or somehow bringing them into in sync with national policy. Give me some tangible way of doing that. If you can take 1 or 2 examples and, come up with some kind of solution to how you'll get X or Y state on board, number 1. Number 2, since you brought up the issue of collectives and things like that, and Gourav Vallabh was in that sense more for state intervention, even though I know you and Karan disagree with that. This is knowing full well what Soviet collectivization and Chinese collectivization resulted in. But is there a model where you can sort of force collectivization because of cultural norms, inheritance laws, and things like that? The fracturization of land, low land holdings, tiny land holdings, and split up land holdings are unfortunately the norm. And third, finally, because Karan brought up the waste of public resources, privatization simply hasn't been happening. Air India was the flagship privatization that was meant to happen. It's still guzzling as much money as it did on day one. The moment they announce a privatization plan, just reading the basics of it, you can tell it's not going to get sold at these preconditions that you've put. So, where are we heading on these three specific topics?
So, the last one, of course, is not a topic of our things, but I would say that privatization, the problem with Air India is that you're not going to make money from privatizing it. You're only going to shed the ability to bleed further into the indeterminate future. So, what you are actually doing by getting rid of Air India or companies like that, there are at least 20 more companies like that, is to prevent future bleeding and make sure that the taxpayer doesn't put those bills. I think it is the healthier units that need to be aware, and non-strategic units like BPCL, Concor, those are the ones that need to be speeded up. And hopefully, at some point, unfortunately, Air India has been one of the victims of COVID. They now had a better plan for privatization, but COVID has destroyed the airline industry, so valuations would have gone further south. So I think you have a real problem there. My guess is anybody who wants to take it, they should do a reverse bidding for the debt, and if necessary, the government takes on the rest of the debt and sell it for 1 rupee. Mamata Banerjee said it was a crown jewel, so give it to West Bengal government for 1 rupee, and there's no problem. She can run it, call it Bongo Express or whatever it is, and run it. So it's perfectly okay. We are happy if a national duty is done from West Bengal. As far as the other things, which was the other 2 points you mentioned?
One is collectivization and overcoming cultural norms on the splitting of this thing, but that also includes modernity. For example, we haven't modernized our water distribution system, and so much of the water is actually lost in transit. So that collective set of agricultural issues.
Yeah, I think we cannot collectivize. We have to be a private farmer-based industry. What you can have is a producers cooperative that's based like a joint stock company, where you own certain shares, and you own that much of the land or something like a rate or whatever it is you need to create. Whereby farmers derive some income from the land that they own. The ownership does not change, but it becomes in some form. They could try various things. But what you cannot do is to have farm sizes at sub-economic level below 2 hectares. It doesn't make sense. You have to find ways to either sell it. So farm sizes need to grow, and you need to get into jobs. That is the fundamental structural change that we need to have in farming. Otherwise, it's not going to work. Collectivization will not work where, cooperative, see, even the Amul model is what? You own your cow. It is only at the procurement and marketing end that you have a corporation, right? So that is what you need to do in various kinds of horticultural crops and all that. You may not be able to do, even in rice, if you create a brand. You already have those brands developing. You have a Surti Kolam, you have a Shior wheat, all those things are happening, right? So once you brand these things, you will actually get prices that are much higher than similarly, you have Ponni rice. So many rice brands are developing, right? Now, if your farmers producer is able to own those brands, and this thing, instead of getting 17, 18 rupees per kg for paddy procurement, you will actually get 30 rupees straight away. Because you're going to deliver it through a brand. The brand ownership needs to be through a joint stock company, but the dividends will come to your farmer based on how much of the rice he produces and it delivers through the marketing organization. So you need to have a structure that's like Amul, or multiple structure. Each district should have some kind of a brand of its own of the key products. You need to develop these things. So that's the way to go. So you can't collectivize in the sense of the Soviet model, which is top down and all that. You have to retain ownership structures. People have to exit farming, and those who don't exit farming should be able to sell through a producers cooperative without giving ownership. They can lease lands. They can do contract farming by banding together. So many things have to be done. But these structures need to be developed. They're developing in some parts of some states, but they're not. One more thing I wanted to say, which you didn't ask me. Actually, Gauravji asked a right question. Why is it that only workers have to bear the brunt of all these so-called reforms? But let me tell you, the reforms in labor actually came last. Okay, for the last 30 years, employers have been asking for an exit policy for labor. But what the government gave us was an exit policy for management. The IBC code is an exit policy for management. And look at the sheer, he talks about suit boot. Every suit has been booted out there. Did the Ruyas keep their steel plant? No. Did the Ruyas keep their oil plant? No. Did the Tatas keep their telecom company? No. Did Ambani lose a telecom company? Yes. Did the JP Group lose? See, the earlier thing was you nationalize losses and privatize profits. This time, for the first time after IBC, many businesses have had to sell their best businesses in order to pay back banks. Did JP's? No. They had to sell their cement unit, which was a profitable one. So what you have seen is a fundamental shoot boot ki sarkar has been suits that are not performing have been voted out. And that is the fundamental structure. So you have an exit policy for management that doesn't perform. And only after that have you bought labor reform. So the labor can see that their bosses are getting the boot first and not themselves. So I think politically this was correctly done. That you first show that companies have to perform. Then only you say, okay, now that you are a responsible kind of management and you yourself can be shown the door, you have flexibility in labor. It's the right political way in which to progress. That's what they've done.
Okay. Right. So one very important point that I want to point out to the audience was the cultural aspect that Jaggi sir brought out. You know, France and Italy, they have the Appellation d'origine contrôlée, the DOCG and things like that, you know, which say Parmesan can only be produced here or arborio rice can be only produced here. And, you know, that adds value to a product and puts more money into the farmer, the producer. First of all, it controls it, it localizes it, and then it puts more money because it adds a sort of brand value to it. So that's a very important thing, which I think, you know, for a supposedly cultural nationalist government, we haven't really done. However, the last I checked, the bankruptcy code, the new bankruptcy law, hadn't been implemented. Has anyone actually filed for bankruptcy under that thing? So you can't actually get rid of the board and things like that. I think there's a lot of resistance to it as well. So there's that.
What is that?
They haven't actually implemented it yet. Has anyone actually filed for bankruptcy under the new bankruptcy law?
Yeah. Thousands of them. And many of them have been resolved. In fact, many companies are actually paying back their debts in order to avoid the IBC. So it's being solved in multiple ways. What is happening is, see, where the bankruptcy code works is, if you have a good business but a bad balance sheet, the bankruptcy code works. If you have a bad business and a bad balance sheet, then your value you will realize very low, because there is nobody who wants to buy your business except as scrap. So that is the difference. So that's where the IBC works.
Okay. Vallabhji, one question. Of course, you can feel free to respond to what the others said, but, you know, just to break the cycle, because I feel we're getting into this cycle of action-reaction cycle, just ab initio. Because, you know, the Indian farmer, unlike, say, a modern society or an urban society, has a great attachment to the land. Right, because it's the one tangible product he or she owns. And just like that, you'll also see this attachment to gold, because given fluctuations in currency and things like that, gold is seen as the go-to stock standard for saving up and things like that. Just purely without context to the previous conversations, how do you think we break this attachment to land, which is preventing land acquisition and requiring very, very expensive land acquisition laws to come in, and, you know, capitalizing gold reserves? So how do you break that traditional attachment to land and gold?
Just start with the where Mr. Jaggi and Mr. Bhasin was talking, and then I will relate that with your question. Mr. Bhasin had mentioned that MSP realization is not a government duty. Precisely, I am thankful for this statement. But Is anybody in government is having courage to make this a statement? And precisely, I agree with you. What you said that MSP हमारा क्या काम है MSP में? बिल्कुल सही बात बोले बसीन साहब. पर
I
सरकार
actually
में
didn't
कोई नहीं.
make that
Please,
statement.
let me complete.
I didn't make that statement. You're interpreting it wrong.
Can you repeat that
I,
statement which you have
I
made?
made a
Because
statement. I made a very precise statement that while the government is continuing with MSPs, it is my opinion that MSPs does not serve the objective of having a
okay, okay,
agricultural
okay. I
policy.
agree,
Yes.
agree. I had written the same. So MSP doesn't serve the
Yeah.
purpose. But Government of India says that MSP serves the purpose. Prime Minister makes this a statement while making a statement on the agriculture bills in the parliament, which is contradictory to you. So I agree with you that these three bills are enacted in the way on the very premise that MSP should be bypassed, MSP should be killed, Santa Kumar committee should be implemented. I agree with you, but that is a fear of a farmer. That is the fear because of which farmers are on the road. Then second, you told me that I should become a student of Dr. Singh. Yes, thank you. I should become. I should become a student of Dr. Aluwalia. Yes, thank you. I should become. But I request you, you should not become a student of a lady who says cars are not sold because Ola and Uber is there. You should not become a student of that gentleman who says that box office collection is going up, it means economy is going up. आप उनके स्टूडेंट मत बच जाना, नहीं तो बहुत मुसीबत आ जाएगी. मैं तो बन जाऊंगा, आपने सही. Then third, you had raised a point on rural economy, and you told me that rural economy in first quarter is growing. Yes, you are correct. But dear Mr. Basil, I think you missed one argument, and I hope you are aware of this. I'm not saying you are not aware of this. That in our country, rural economy or agriculture growth, which 3.4% you are quoting in quarter one, that is purely on the basis of a good monsoon or bad monsoon. So state's intervention is very, very minimal in that. Then coming to the fourth issue, you said that even from your perspective, 42% government spending is good. Mr. Basin, April to June 2020, the first quarter, where we are in 100% lockdown, government spending in first quarter was 100% vis-a-vis the last quarter. So the lacuna comes from the quarter which starts from the July and concluded on September. So please don't make these type of statements without any data support.
Sir, you are
Please,
conflating.
let me.
No, no, no.
I don't want to meme. There will be enough time. I will request Abhijit ji to give 20 minutes to Mr. Basin. I will listen to him before concluding. So don't make these type of statements without any data, because it gives a wrong and bad impression about your information. And again, I am reiterating, उनके स्टूडेंट मत बन जाना जिन्होंने कहा कि प्याज की कीमतें बढ़ रही, तो मैं क्या करूं, मैं तो कांदे खाती नहीं. उनके मत बनना आप. Then coming to Bihar, you had made a statement and I got the data. In Bihar, APMC was abolished in 2006. Right now, and this is the current crop data, 70 lakh metric ton dhan is the output. The MSP of the dhan is 1888 per quintal, and Bihar farmer on an average is getting 1100 rupees. So by bypassing APMC, what Bihar farmers are getting, 1888 is the MSP, and they are getting 1100 rupee on an average for their dhan output. Why in 14 years that is not matured? You are saying Bihar is one of the example. Are 7 to 8% of the land and the farmers are located in Bihar. You can't say this is one of the area. This is an important area. Now coming to the GST Council. You said that okay, हम तो शुरू से 4 रेट ही लाना चाहते थे. बसीन साहब, आप थोड़ा आज तैयारी करके नहीं आए. From the day when GST got implemented, there were 9 rates. You will be surprised. And Arun Jaitley ji used to say the Mercedes and milk can't be taxed together. He used to give this argument when our finance minister in the GST council raised a point that we require a rate rationalization. Arun Jaitley ji's statement, who is a learned person in the Indian politics, all of us respect the person. He quoted that Mercedes and milk can't be taxed together. फिर भैया क्यों आज आपने 8 से 4 हुए हो, और भी हो जाओ. I want you should learn, and then saying that आप हमका सहयोग नहीं करते. आपको मैं मिनट्स दिखा सकता हूँ भसीन साहब, जीएसटी काउंसिल के मिनट्स है ना, वो आप भी देख सकते हैं. एक मिनट अभी 2 more minutes. So आपको I can share the GST Council minutes with you to check those GST Council minutes before speaking anything. Who said what is written in those minutes? So now coming to your precise, Mr. Jagannathan had made a one very good remark that national loss, sir, SBI का पैसा यस बैंक में लगता है, वो नेशनल लॉस है, इंटरनेशनल लॉस है या प्राइवेट लॉस? सर टेल मी, IL&FS को गवर्नमेंट पैसा डालती है, वो नेशनल लॉस है कि इंटरनेशनल लॉस? You just tell me, sir. When you quoted that earlier,
I'll just give you one line if you want, if you like. Just one line, I'll say.
Yes, sir.
If I, with your permission. See, the thing is, financial sector is slightly different from the real sector. The reason is very simple, because if suppose a bank fails, it creates huge ripples across all sectors. Okay, which is why in 2008, when there were several bank failures, the US government actually stepped in. And this is the problem. I agree with you. I have no quarrel with you that people who make bad decisions should be allowed to go under. But the problem is, we have to make exceptions with banks which actually create ripple effects and they can destroy the entire economy. So financial sector needs to be separated from the real sector. My comments relate to the real sector. Sorry to intervene.
So,
Abhijit, 1 more minute, then we have to.
One more minute,
just
one more minute and 40 seconds, Mr. Jagannathan took of my time. So 1 minute 40 seconds.
Yeah. Please,
so
please.
That is not fair. Then Abhijit, Mr. Bhasin was telling about manufacturing sector, make in India manufacturing sector. Bhasin साहब, 100 लोगों तक का तो पहले से था ना labor law कि more than 100 you require a state intervention before retrenchment. At that time, when we have that labor law, the manufacturing sector contribution was 15.6%. And in last 4 years, why it came down from 15.6% of GDP of a manufacturing sector to 13.7% of GDP in 2019? This year data is not out. I'm not quoting this year data, which will be abnormally low. So, thoda sa, whenever you make an argument, Bhasin Saab, just give some data and just give some logic out of those arguments. Just for the sake of opposition, don't oppose. Now, coming to your question, 40 seconds, Abhijit, that gold and the real estate or the land. I can relate your question with the land, the agriculture so-called reforms by the government of India. I'm asking, by having this contract farming, what you are trying to convey, that a small farmer who is holding 1 acre or 2 acre or 3 acre will undertake an agreement with a guy who might be suit boot or pant shirt, whatever name you like, you take that name. But that guy who is farming is a dhoti kurta. That dhoti kurta guy is bargaining or is making an agreement of his output with a guy in a contract farming legislation, that what will be the price, what will be the quality of the output. Do you feel he is having that bargaining capacity to do all those things? That is the reason I told at the beginning. And still I am having my 4 questions, that what is the benefit farmers got because of these agriculture reforms? Is MSP assured? Yes or no? Is contract farming is not giving in a plate the entire land to the suit guys? And last statement, that by having a retrenchment policy without state intervention, I am asking Mr. Bhasin, why you stop for 300? Why not you have it 3,000? Okay. Because you don't want to enter into
got to finish up. I don't think that answered my question, but we have to finish up. So Karan, you get the last word because you also had the last word when we started up. So if you can, I know I'm being unfair to you, but if you can keep it to about 2 minutes, please. And then we'll go into Q&A. We've only got about questions. Yeah.
And give my 1 minute also to him. I will be ready to hear from him.
No. I don't think I need more than 30 seconds because we are dealing with a reluctant student who's willing to quote statistics without having any idea of how they're supposed to be quoted. The figure that he's talking about of first quarter, he's taking in the cash transfers included, which were the upfront fiscal response and the income tax refunds that were did immediately upfront in the first quarter itself. तो उसको ऐड करके देखोगे तो BA obviously by
sir.
two, sir,
I had
the
not
same,
done.
sir, you can
Yes, sir,
please go
बोलने
on my
दीजिए, बोलने
website.
दीजिए.
You can please go on my website and take a look at some of the work that I've done. I've documented all of that. Please take a good look at stuff and then make these statements. On the GST also, I've got a paper uploaded on the website. You can go download it, take a look at it. It has everything there, including minutes, किसने क्या कहा, कब कैसे कौन सी कॉम्प्लेक्सिटी ऐड हुई, सब लिखा हुआ है सर. आप जाके पढ़ने की आदत डालिए थोड़ा. एंड आप अगर आप डालेंगे तो प्लीज अपने फॉर्मर प्रेसिडेंट को भी डालिएगा थोड़ा, पढ़ने के बाद फिर स्टेटमेंट देने की आदत. एज फार एज my biggest problem over here is that all his arguments are predated on rhetoric and not on facts. ये हो जाएगा, हायोरामा ये करेंगे तो वो हो जाएगा, किसान और गरीब हो जाएगा, सूट बूट की सरकार हो जाएगी. सर, सूट बूट की सरकार इस इंडिया ने सिर्फ एक ही देखी थी between 2004 and 2014 when you gave loans to your friends in the sort of corporate sector and you ruined India's financial sector and itself. And this is not what I am saying. And this is not what I am saying, sir. This is being said by Raghuram Rajan. This has been said by sir. उसको भी आप लोगों ने दिया था सबसे पहला लोन. आप रघुराम राजन जी से पूछिए, उनकी parliamentary statement है. So Mr. Vallabh, you are a professor, you are a learned man. Please act like one for a change. That's all that my humble request is.
Thank you.
Okay.
I am okay to hear from you, but you stopped. I am here to hear from you that how much you can make an argument.
Okay. So we're going into Q&A. I just wanted to pass on one viewer comment, Karan. It says somebody feels that you remind them of Akhilesh Yadav. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but I suppose take it as a compliment. So
That's
the first
definitely a bad
question.
thing.
Okay. So the first question is from Mahadevan. It's directed, and if I could just request everybody to keep their answers extremely short, 30 seconds to 1 minute, please, no more than that. To Professor Jagannathan and Mr. Bhasin, can the agricultural reforms effectively check illegal hoarding that ultimately affects prices? Also, how does this bill promote in-house crop research and its release into international markets?
One thing, I'm not a professor, but I'm merely a journalist. Okay. Anyway, the part, I think we get obsessed too much about hoarding and other things. I think this comes from our indie film thing, where I think Bollywood perpetually shows that one little munshi is hoarding all kinds of things and doing things against the poor. I think the market operates on the basis nobody can hoard indefinitely. Nobody has that kind of money where they can hoard indefinitely. Just okay, some people, speculators, might hoard here and there, but even they are performing an economic function, indicating that a shortage is looming and therefore signaling to the market that you need to produce more. So I think, and beyond a point, nobody can hoard in such a way and in such a significant numbers that it completely distorts pricing for all times to come. Short term, yes, it can impact prices, say in 1 month, 2 months, 3 weeks possible. But everything can be addressed through imports or other kinds of measures. So that's one thing. Second thing is, this thing does not immediately give you any kind of impetus to research or something. That is something that has to be funded by both government, NGOs, and large buyers who need to invest in crop research, because without that, productivity gains that are required will not come from the small producer who is certainly going to invest in research. It's not going to happen. It is a mixture of government, large corporations which need a certain type of produce to come from it. Like if you want certain kinds of tomatoes so that you can make ketchup from that, then you need to do the research and provide the kind of seeds that a farmer will give, so that the farmer benefits, you also benefit, and the thing. So that is going to come from an independent thing. But the mere fact that the market for agricultural produce is opened up will create those surpluses that are necessary for research.
Okay. Anything to add to that, Karan?
I'd just like to make a quick point that, and again, this is something that I've written about in the past, that to my displeasure, government has retained a provision to intervene in the event of 100% price escalation to ensure that prices do not increase. I think that that's fundamentally against the principle that we were trying to adopt. So that's one disagreement I have. But broadly, I think what Jaggi sir has mentioned is absolutely spot on, that it's those efficiency gains that will ensure that such intervention will not be required beyond a particular point. So I
Okay.
think we can experience some price spikes occasionally for the next 3 to 6 months, but beyond that, it should stabilize.
Okay. Vallabhji, this is a question to all, but I'm going to start with you again very quickly because we're running out of time. 20 to 30 seconds, please, no more. How to convince educated youth to foray into the agri business, including farming? 20, 30 seconds max, please.
See, what Mr. Jagannathan was saying, I agree with that statement. There are three issues. One is the productivity of the output. Productivity is right now also we had a good amount of productivity, but how to diversify the product? So more the diversification on the ground, more the people who are going to join the agricultural sector. When I say diversification, like for that matter, potato, there may be 20 types of potato, 10 types of tomato, 15 types of onions, and all are having different price tags. So currently, unfortunately, we had entered into a high scale productivity output rather than the output where productivity may be slightly lower, but the output may be unique and their selling proposition of that output is many times higher than the output which we are producing. So here comes the government intervention. If government comes with these type of strategies and policies, the new generation youth is definitely going to take agriculture sector as a profession or as a occupation.
Okay. Anything to add to that, Jaggi sir, Karan?
See, I would say a simple thing that I am fundamentally against government intervention. The government should intervene as little as possible. What it should do is monitor the effects of the market level changes that you are introducing now. So, if there are, let's say, some categories of farmers turn out to be major losers because of this, suppose, then it will need to modify policy to help those losers from the marketization of the agricultural economy. Okay, this happens in globalization also, right? Globalization, some people are able to take big advantage of globalization, others lose out. So you've got to make sure that if there are losers, how do you make the losers less of losers and come back to some kind of gain? This is the problem with any kind of market economy where you can have globalization or technology induction. There are gainers and losers from every market move. So government needs to monitor this and see if there are large segments of losers, then you should intervene and see how you can improve the gains for them. That's what you need to do.
Okay.
But don't intervene right up front and say, I will manage everything from birth to death for everybody. Then that's a disaster.
I will just like to add that
Karan, anything to add?
yeah, I just want to make a quick point that for anyone to decide to enter into any business, there has to be a value proposition and it has to be a viable enterprise. So as Jaggi sir said that once government starts moving out and we move a sizable amount of people away from agriculture, there will be ample opportunities that will open up, and that in itself would be a very attractive proposition. So we don't really have to reinvent the wheel and push people to go into agriculture or say industry. We should allow the labor market to act as the guidance mechanism. And I think I know a lot of cases where people have come back to India and have started organic farming as a viable enterprise. So there is this thing that some people are moving towards farming as a viable enterprise. It's just that it's happening at a very granular level, and we know it only through anecdotal evidences. So probably maybe 10 years down the line, we can have some of these sort of changes and movements happening on their own.
Abhijit,
Okay.
precisely,
I'm
it
just
is a
going to
high,
skip this
high,
question from Parthsarthi because it's quite rhetorical.
Abhijit, it's a
ओडिशा
high,
में उपजाऊ जमीन नहीं है. Sorry.
Abhijit.
Vallabhji, we've got to wrap up. So the
Okay,
final
okay,
question, I'm just sorry. Okay, so the last question, Yosha, from Yosha to sorry, I just skipped the last question from Parthsarthi because it seemed quite rhetorical, right? So the last question, Yosha, to Karan and Jaggi sir, why can't India adopt an economic model inspired by our history, like Kautilya, Marathas, and drop Keynes, Friedman, and Muller? Now, I personally don't know how a 21st century economy is meant to adopt pre-industrial economic norms, but if you two have any quick ideas, 20 seconds each,
No, one simple
on
idea
how
is to
that.
have a simple and low taxation system. I think
Yeah.
Kautilya's thing, he said 1/6 of the produce can be taxed up to, that is 16%. And I think if you move
16.
to a 15% fixed tax rate and a 15% central GST regime and a 15% TDS regime, all stuck at 15%, I think you'll move to a very simple taxation system, both indirect and direct taxes. Taxes will start overflowing as economy actually thing. You simplify the taxation, just put it around 15%. Kautilya's norm was 1/6, which is 16.13%, right? So I'm saying 15% is a good rate for direct taxes and indirect taxes, and the rest will come automatically. I don't think you need to move anywhere else. That should be the target. You can do it over 5 years. You don't have to do it in 1 year. But you have, once you move there, get the government off the backs of people, this economy will boom. Because we are an entrepreneurial people. We don't need a my baap sarkar. You only need to take out the people who can't take care of themselves. Rest of the people know how to take care of themselves.
Okay.
I fundamentally,
Karan,
yeah,
20 seconds.
I fundamentally don't see much difference in what some of our ancient texts speak, because they were also, pro trade, pro sort of private enterprise, etc. So there's some degree of reconciliation there. So I don't think that both are necessarily in conflict. But I do agree that there are several limitations. We can't have an industrial policy which is based on ancient Indian text. So that is the limitation that we need to keep in mind. But the basic principles and the basic premise or founding principles are more or less consistent and the same. And I think we should move towards a more libertarian economy, restricting the role of the state as much as possible. It is good for the economy, it's good for the society, and ultimately we want to empower citizens and make sure that citizens have far more rights than the rights of the state in the country, whether at the central level or at the sort of provincial level.
Absolutely. I've just never come across an ancient text, and by ancient I mean pre 1800s, 1700s, that was remotely socialist.
Abhijit,
I think it
yeah,
would be
I had
radical
a, I
capitalism
had
to go
a,
back to any of those older texts. But
I
Karan
had a,
Bhasin ji, Gaurav Vallabh ji, Jaggi ji, thank you so
Abhijit,
much on behalf of the
can you
organizers,
hear
the
me?
Jaipur Dialogues. Thank you so much. I hope the audience enjoyed the session and the Q&A. So thank you and have a great day.
Thank you, Abhijit. Thank you, Karan.
Thanks
Nice.
everyone. Thank
Thank
you
you,
so much,
Gaurav.
Abhijit.
Thank you,
Thank you, Gaurav. Yeah.
Yeah.